Excellent. Thank you all so much for being here. It is wonderful to see all of your faces. And here at Moose Jaw, we're just so grateful for you to show up and commit to learning and being together in community this morning. My name is Katie Klein. I'm the Executive Director of Moose Jaw. I'd also like to introduce you to Reverend Leslie Mills, who is our Community Outreach Director and Congregational Liaison. So she's here with me and we'll be here to guide you through this workshop together. I am joining you all from Duluth, Minnesota, on land that was cared for and called home by the Ojibwe, Dakota, Northern Cheyenne, and other Native peoples from time immemorial. It is so wonderful to be with all of you, to see all of your faces as we join together for this workshop called Beyond the Land Acknowledgement. Before we begin, let's place our hands over our hearts and take a few collective deep breaths to ground ourselves in this shared and sacred space. Silently thank the Indigenous and Native caretakers of the land you are on and from. If you know their names, say them to yourselves at this time. And if you do not, commit to learning them. In this moment, with your hand over your heart, commit to taking whatever steps are necessary towards healing and repair. To our Native siblings, we say, you are still here. We will not erase you. And I will turn things over to Leslie for our chalice lighting. And if you have a candle or a chalice handy, go ahead and join us in lighting at this time.
So I'll invite you all to join me if you have a chalice or a candle, or you can just ignite a flame in the recesses of your hearts. We ignite this flame, symbol of our faith, to beckon us into community, warm our hearts with love, and to give us a light to follow as we carry our faith into action. I'll be sharing a video with you next to give you a background on land acknowledgements and their importance and impact.
Before I begin this morning, I'd like to recognize the Algonquin Nation, on whose traditional territory we are gathering. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land.
Wherever I go on God's green earth, I do the Lakota tradition of acknowledging the four directions, the land, and the people living there. Unchimaka, as I call Grandmother Earth, the land, I view her as a sacred, living entity, and that's the way we acknowledge it in, Lakota thought and philosophy.
As a Native person, I'm ready for any kind of confrontation that might come up, or I'm preparing myself to remind people of all those things that they forget about. I was at a meeting in Minneapolis, and the room was primarily non-Native people. I was in a non-Native organization, but this executive director got up and said, okay, we're gonna get started. So everybody, was sitting down and getting quiet. And she said, I'd like to get started by acknowledging the Indigenous culture of Minnesota. And I was like, whoa. And it just made everything fall away a little bit from me. My guard went down, I was more relaxed. Because by saying that, that means she understands something that is just you can't talk about, right? it just relaxed me as a minority, as a woman, and as a Native person. Like it just like pulled away this layer that's always there, you know. It was super cool.
We're at a time where non-Native cultures are understanding the traditions of Indigenous peoples for probably the first time in our histories. So like when I go to New Zealand, the protocol is to acknowledge each other's ancestors and your mountains and your rivers. And that's such a beautiful tradition. When people are in that space and say, we acknowledge who you are, this land, where your people come from, they're saying we acknowledge a relationship, but we're also creating that relationship. This is a good thing.
The important thing would be that folks would then sit with that. Like, what does it mean that our settlement is occupying this space? And what responsibility do I have considering that legacy to these contemporary things, right? And how do I stop distancing myself from that? Ideally, that would be, for me, the impact that this has.
If you start acknowledging that the land that you're standing on and the space that you are in belong to people that are still here, like, makes so much more room for understanding of all these other issues. It's one of those little things that, like, if it could just tip a little bit, all the like dominoes that could fall from it, I think are important.
Now I'm like imagining it and like wanting to live in that, like the thing that I'm imagining, like, yeah, that's actually really beautiful.
It's just being a genuine human being to acknowledge each other's histories, the good and the bad.
Okay, any thoughts or reactions, takeaways from that video that anybody would like to share with the group?
Do you want us to put, okay, in the chat or verbally?
Yeah, you can just share verbally. I think we're small enough to make that work.
Okay, Lindsay here. I wanted to just mention how lovely I thought it was that one of the very first ones said that the Native people are the caretakers in the past, present, and future of this land. And I feel like that felt like a really important, you know, like it's not just this thing that happened, that we are still living it all out.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was extremely impactful for me too. Other thoughts or impressions from the video?
I appreciated that they went and acknowledged the world as a living sacred being. That is part of what we do. So it's more than just people. And I think white culture a lot of times not only identifies us with white culture, but also we don't see the earth as something other than to be tamed or used for our benefit. So I think that is the power of acknowledging this.
Thank you so much. Yes, Shelley, I think your hand is raised.
I just wanted to say that when I first did a land acknowledgement, I felt very uncomfortable. I have learned a lot since, but I really appreciate learning more. The land acknowledgement acceptance, there are few places I find when I'm at meetings that do this.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing, Shelley. How many of you in your congregations routinely share a land acknowledgement? You can just kind of raise your hand as part of your services or public facing events. So it looks like most, but not all for sure. Yeah, well, that's why we're here, to explore land acknowledgements, the impact of land acknowledgements, and also the actions that need to accompany them in order to make them meaningful. So I'm going to share a reading now. This comes from Chelsea Vowell, who is a Métis woman from the Plains Cree community. And she writes as follows. Land acknowledgement is a way that people insert an awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights in everyday life. This is often done at the beginning of ceremonies, lectures, or any public event. It can be a subtle way to recognize the history of colonialism and a need for a change in settler colonial societies. However, these acknowledgements can easily be a token gesture, more performative than meaningful in practice. All settlers, including recent arrivants, have a responsibility to consider what it means to acknowledge the history and legacy of colonialism. What are some of the privileges settlers enjoy today because of colonialism? How can individuals develop relationships with people whose territory they are living on? What are you or your congregation doing beyond acknowledging the territory where you live, work, or hold your events? And what might you be doing that perpetuates settler colonialism rather than considering alternative ways forward? Do you have an understanding of the ongoing violence and the trauma that is part of the structure of colonialism? If we think of land acknowledgements as opportunities for potential disruption, then they can be transformative acts that to some extent can undo Indigenous erasure. I believe this is true as long as these acknowledgements discomfit both those speaking and hearing the words. So we have a short video that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I think it kind of gets at this point in an impactful way. I shared it in the confirmation email, but for those who registered late, you might not have had a chance to see it. So Leslie's going to share it with us. It's just about a minute long.
Before we begin this evening's performance, we would like to acknowledge that this theater stands on territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Petun First Nations. We are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to make right with all our relations. And now, please enjoy the show.
Oh, sorry, hello? Sorry. Excuse me, should we go?
Excuse me?
Oh, no, I just mean if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we leave?
Oh, no. The theater is here now. We'd just like to acknowledge whose land it is.
I'm sorry, I'm so confused. So if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we do something about that, or?
Hopefully we'll enjoy the performance.
Oh, okay, so some of the money from the ticket sales of the show are going to the Indigenous communities?
Well, no.
Oh, a portion of them?
No, the ticket sales go to the theater.
So is the money from the bottled water sold here going to the First Nations for clean drinking water, or?
Oh, no, that money goes to Nestle.
Nestle.
They're a sponsor.
I'm so sorry. I'm so confused. So whose land are we on? What are we doing?
It's a dialogue.
How are we making right?
Well, there's a plaque you can read in the lobby.
I don't understand.
I'm getting a message from the stage manager that we need to begin the show, so please take your seats.
But
have a good time.
But
before we begin this evening's performance.
Okay, so obviously a bit tongue-in-cheek, but also highly relatable, right? Has any initial responses to that reel? Jill says relatable indeed. Judy, did you have a comment? Oops, you're muted, Judy. Still, there you go.
Yeah, I did see that before, and then the video that you showed previously, I was a bit surprised that the Indigenous people appreciated so much the land acknowledgement statements. And I thought, oh, so they don't resent that we're doing this, we're saying this without doing anything. But I think that the video that you just showed suggests that there may possibly sometimes be a bit of resentment that we make these statements, and that's all we do.
Yep, exactly. Thank you so much, Judy. Jean.
Hi, sorry I have to have my video off because I'm in the car, but I'm listening in because I'm working, well, I'm giving a presentation at the Unitarian Society this Sunday on natural burial, but we're really trying to do conservation burial, which is a step beyond just natural burial, but reclaim that land. And as we're working toward this, we're looking at ways that we can go beyond just a statement, like paying them for the land. I don't know. I mean, it's wide open on what we can do, because we're right. That she was exactly right. That was a great video, because I've heard this being acknowledged for years now, but what are people actually doing? And when some of the suggestions of what we could do with this land are like, whoa, that's going to cost us money. That's going to be really hard on us. That's going to be like, no, we can't do that. And it's like, yeah, we need to do that. If we really, quit saying things if you're not going to walk the walk. So I'm listening in because I want to walk the walk, and it's hard. It's going to be really hard. Hard decisions we'll have to make as an organization.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Jean, and for your comments. And yes, absolutely. This is not easy work, right? Like going beyond the performative gesture and actually doing the work. That's where the discomfort and the hard stuff comes in. And that's why we're here today, to talk about how we can back up these words with action. Couple comments in the chat. Anna says, I chuckled at the Nestle reference to bottled water. So did I. And from Shelley, land acknowledgement is an important first step, but insufficient on its own. And Malia says, thanks, Jean. I agree that getting to real reparations is hard and complicated. It is. It is. And, that's why we are here together today, to be in community, to talk about accountability, to hold each other to account, and brainstorm ways that we as UUs can live into our commitment to the Indigenous people on whose land we occupy and our churches and buildings occupy. So it's really important that you're here, and I so appreciate your commitment to this issue. President Robert Larson of the Lower Sioux Indian community puts it like this: an apology or an acknowledgement is one thing, but what are you going to do next? In other words, every moment spent agonizing over land acknowledgement wording is time that could be used to actually support Indigenous people. Is it wrong to write a land acknowledgement statement? No. But if you do, your statement should highlight a strong call to action and action steps. It should encourage your audience members to create their own steps as well. So the following video is really important and kind of breaks this down for us. And it was created by the Native Governance Center. It's called Beyond Land Acknowledgement. it's 4 minutes long. Leslie will play it for us and also link it in the chat. And I just wanted to mention too, I will send out a follow-up email to our time together today that has links to all of this information for you to have and to hopefully share with the rest of your congregations.
Have you ever heard a land acknowledgement statement delivered in a conference, community gathering, festival, or concert? Indigenous land acknowledgement, or the practice of recognizing Indigenous past, present, and future of a particular location, is growing in popularity. While popular, land acknowledgement unfortunately can be problematic. Sometimes when crafting land acknowledgement statements, non-Indigenous folks ask Indigenous people and communities to do free emotional labor. In addition, it's easy for land acknowledgement to become yet another form of optical allyship. Statements often lack the call to action and next steps. Without these components, they're just empty words that don't tangibly help Indigenous communities. Instead of spending time on a land acknowledgement statement, try creating an action plan. Your action plan will highlight the concrete steps you plan to take to support Indigenous people into the future. To create an action plan that's specific, accurate, and impactful, follow these steps. First, do an assessment. Are any of your current behaviors causing harm to Indian country? If so, hold yourself accountable for changing them in your plan. Next, do a resource assessment. What resources can you personally provide to support Indigenous people and nations? For example, can you set aside money each month for a recurring donation to an Indigenous organization? Do you have time to show up to an Indigenous-led protest? You also need to do some research. Yes, you heard that right. Writing an action plan instead of a land acknowledgement does not mean you're off the hook for doing your homework. Get familiar with what's happening in your area and how you can help. Investigate questions such as, what is the Indigenous history of the land I occupy? What Native nation is located closest to me? What Native-led organizations and nonprofit operate in my area? Once you've done this work, it's time to connect the dots. Look for points of alignment between your resource assessment and your research. Use the alignment to outline steps with measurable actions. For example, you might determine that you have time to show up to Indigenous-led protests and events. And you might have discovered that community members are currently convening to protest the installation of a new pipeline on Indigenous land. Your action step then could say, I will attend the upcoming pipeline demonstration at the state capitol and attend at least 3 other related events per year. When your plan is complete, go public. Share your action steps with your friends, family, and neighbors. Tell your community that you are committed to supporting Indigenous people. Challenge people and organizations in your life to create their own plan. Keep your action plan somewhere handy too. Your plan doesn't belong in a drawer. Print it out and put it on the fridge. Store it in the notes section of your phone. Put it somewhere that will help you see it regularly. Remember to reflect on your progress. Your action plan is an ongoing commitment. From time to time, check on your plan. How many of your action steps have you actually completed? Don't be afraid to update your assessments and your plan if you're making any major life changes. And finally, stay humble. Your learning does not stop at your action plan. All of us always have room to grow and more to do. For additional tips on creating an action plan, along with ideas for action steps and a sample plan, visit nativegov.org.
Nativegov.org, nativegov.org is such a good resource. And again, when I send the follow-up email, I will link to that website, and within it, you can find guides that will take you step by step through creating an action plan and following up with accountability. So for example, if you're in a congregation who is accustomed to hearing your land acknowledgement every day or every Sunday, these same people should be very familiar with your action plan. It should be posted in a public place where people can access it and interact with it on a regular basis. And there should be regular check-ins to make sure that the congregation is being held accountable to the steps outlined in your action plan. Any questions or thoughts on the video before we kind of dig into the various steps of creating an action plan a little bit more deeply? John.
Let me turn on my video so you can see me talking too. So I just put also into the chat this issue about the doctrine of discovery. And it is such a fundamental thing to our society that all our action plans are wonderful, but this pervading, self-healing concept, of property ownership is the problem. And I wonder if we're really addressing it with our penny ante action plans.
Well, the one component, I mean, this can be taken to various extents, and that is up to each congregation to do some deep discernment and conversations about that notion of ownership. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about the land back movement, what's involved in that, and kind of the genesis of it, and the possibility of congregations playing a role in that movement. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. Any other thoughts or reactions? Anna?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I did find that video very useful. Hadn't seen that one yet. And the reason I really liked it is that it seemed like the right scale for a fellowship to think about. It's like, what's local, what's already happening, what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
Not that there aren't personal actions or like societal, but it felt like a very helpful scale for what we're thinking about, at least in my fellowship.
Yeah, I'm glad it was helpful. I felt the same way. I think it's outlining ways that feel that really center your local community. Okay. Oh, was there another? Susan, did you have a hand up?
Yeah. I just want to say that we at First Universalist Church in Minneapolis started having community conversations with a Lakota family when they were trying to change the name of a lake in Minneapolis that was named after a Civil War general who was not a good person. And they wanted to change it back to what they called it, B'day Makaska. And it was like a 2-year journey to get it through. And then it got somebody sued about it. And so it was in the courts for a while, but it finally was done. And there were many people that were happy about it, and some people who had to change their addresses who were not happy about it. It was the right thing to do. And we continued these conversations off and on with this family. And the conversations were started because the head of the family told us that they never make decisions to work with people until they're in a relationship, and that we needed to develop the relationship about where our hearts were and where they were. And we got to know them very well and have continued to support their efforts. They are now doing a yearly Minnekewakan, which is Water is Sacred Water Summit in Rapid City, South Dakota. And we have supported them since they started that, and tried to raise money so that Indigenous youth could go there, because they believe that youth are the future, and that, you know, they need to be part of the conversation. And it's been really hard to get other people interested. There's just a group of us in the congregation that are kind of passionate about trying to right this wrong. And we know that it takes many, many steps, but what they have told us all along is that they welcome anyone who wants to help them, as long as they are willing to develop a relationship and understand where they're coming from. And of course, then they find out where we're at too, which, you know, is we're just kind of newbies with all of this. But it really is a social justice issue, and our church has Black Lives Matter as the main goal in our church, but we continually point out the relationships between environmental justice and Indigenous, Black, BIPOC justice, and that there are very many intersections. And it all has to do with justice, social justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Susan. And yes, you're right. This is all such intersectional work, and it's important to always be mindful of all those intersectionalities. And your point about centering relationship and being in right relationship is absolutely essential. I think that's why the video that we just watched and the recommendation is for step 1 to be self-assessment, right? So we're not going to just launch into reaching out to communities before we've kind of done our internal work, both personally and congregationally. So starting that work and making sure you're coming from a place of knowledge and groundedness is essential, is the essential foundation for this work. So the video, it recommends starting with the self-assessment, considering the behaviors of yourself or your congregation, and asking the difficult and maybe painful question, are any of your current behaviors causing harm to Native communities? And if so, is it possible to change your habits to prevent future damage? So what I thought we would do is kind of use that guiding question as a prompt, break into 2 or 3 breakout groups, and have about 5 minutes just to kind of chew on this question. What, if any, behaviors is your congregation or community engaged in that might be causing harm to Native communities or tribes? And if you could appoint one person to be a note taker, we'll come back in the larger group and share some reflections. So Leslie, would you be able to, let's see, maybe 3 groups? Break us into 3 small groups? Did Lindsay get put into a group?
Yep. Lindsay, are you having trouble joining your group? There we go.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I did 4 rooms just because it
Yeah.
put 5 people in each room.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Do you need to use the bathroom?
No, I'm actually a little worried that I've drunk this much coffee and my digestive system is just like, nah, I'm fine.
I guess you need the video that was about to the ad.
Right? Well, so I didn't actually sleep like at all last night. Horrible insomnia. And this morning I was like, oh my, like what in the world? I didn't have caffeine. I didn't do like, I was tired at bedtime. I took an allergy pill right before bed because my nose was stuffy. And so this morning I researched, I was like, is Claritin D a stimulant? And what do you know? It sure is. It will make it stare at the ceiling all night, which is exactly what I did.
Oh dear, Leslie.
Because it kicks your system, it constricts your blood vessels and puts pressure on your heart, which makes it work faster, which reacts like fight or flight and can create like anxiety or nervousness or something. And I was like,
God.
well, no wonder.
Do you have time to take a nap today?
Not really. Not
dear.
canceling some things. So it's
no.
okay. But I'm just wondering if like, because fight or flight is the opposite of rest and digest.
Right.
So I already experienced the lack of rest, and now I'm wondering if I'm experiencing the lack of digest.
That might be. Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's all good, but I'm wide awake. As I've been for the last 12 hours.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So yeah, we'll give them about 5 minutes. It's kind of a big question for 5 minutes, but
right. Do you want me to let's see, because I can broadcast messages to everyone. So I did broadcast the prompt, so they should all have gotten that. Do you want me to broadcast how much time they have left?
I think we'll give them like a 2-minute warning.
Okay.
In a couple minutes.
All right, that sounds good. Because I know once I click close all rooms, I can indicate how much time they have left.
Okay.
So
yeah, as long as we give them like a wrap up 2-minute warning message.
Okay.
Do you think it's going okay?
I don't know. I guess it depends on who's chatty in all the groups, but I know that room 1 and 2 both have a minister in them. And room 4 has a seminarian. So rooms 1, 2, and 4, I think are probably, they probably have a natural facilitator in there. I don't know anybody in room 3.
Okay.
But hopefully it ends up being a rich conversation for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's not like they're going to come to all the answers, and these are broader conversations to take place in their own communities, but it's just sort of to get the wheels turning a little bit.
Right. And then they'll come back and we'll get to collect responses.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that I'm getting to eavesdrop on this program.
Well, I'm really glad that you're able to just help facilitate, because, you know, it is really kind of a lot to be like, I don't know, it overwhelms me.
Yeah. I mean, I got pretty proficient at doing all the things and making it look seamless during the pandemic when I was spending 20 hours a week on Zoom.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be able to draw on those skills again, but
yeah.
If I have the option of someone else running tech while I do the program, I vote yes every time. So
I know. I don't know. I just find I get flustered and then I like can't find the screen and then I'm like,
right. I mean, I've had it go in anxiety provoking ways enough times that by now when the snafus happen, I'm like, oh, this is how I fix that one. Oh, this is right. But like when we did the little Vespers service on Sunday, my opening song with my ukulele was Spirit of Life, and I'm like 2 lines into the song and Dallas is like, hey Leslie, we can't actually hear you because Zoom is blocking the ukulele.
Oh,
like, oh, my entire program is basically a bunch of songs with little readings in between.
oh my God, what did you do?
Hunted. And everyone was really gracious. And now we have a month to figure out how to make music work on Zoom.
Oh my God. That is so stressful in the moment though. I would have been like, I'm out of here.
Right. Like I basically ended up singing all of the songs a cappella without the ukulele.
Oh my God, that's impressive. Okay, let's give them a 2.
2-minute warning. Well, they're getting a 60-second warning. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think. I wish Zoom was more clear about what's going to happen when I click this button. Like I clicked close all rooms and it says all participants will be returned to the main session in 60 seconds. And my options are cancel or close all rooms. I'm like, okay, so do they already have the 60-second warning or do I have to click close all rooms to give them the 60? Okay,
you have to click it.
All right. There we go. 60 seconds. Here we go. Perfect. It's been a while since I handled breakout rooms. It's funny, I don't know any of the non-ministry people. There's no familiar names here.
Actually, I only know, I guess I'd say about 5 other people here.
Okay.
But there's a lot of names and faces that are new.
Well, I'm hoping we get regulars coming to our programs.
That would be awesome. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you all again. You made it back. That's a good thing. Now, of course, this was a small amount of time and was not comprehensive in any way, but hopefully it helped to just start to get the wheels turning a little. And these are conversations to have within your congregations or committees going forward. But is anybody willing to share some reflections from your conversations? The prompt was, what, if any, behaviors is your congregation or community engaged in that might be causing harm to Native communities? Anna.
Yeah, I took some notes so I can report out from our group. Things that came up were, 1, we don't know, we would like to ask.
Okay.
Other thoughts were, as either new landowners or will be soon landowners for fellowships that are purchasing property, or thinking like, what are the new impacts that we have there, and could we use a rental calculator or an honor tax or something? And then other concerns were how to honor Native music without causing harm. So respecting it, and when you use that music, how to do that in a good way. I think those were kind of the 3 main themes that came up.
Thank you. Thanks so much. John.
Our group talked about a couple of things. The main theme that came out of it, it seems to me, and please stop me or correct me if I'm wrong, was that we don't even know words to ask the questions in many ways. Our problem is that we don't have the same way of looking at the world, and to learn that is necessary in order to be able to address immediate concerns. That it has to be local stuff that we try to do, and that the that knowing the past, present, and future is what we're trying to sort of understand. In the past, the history is so important, but it's steeped in this different way of looking at the world, looking at the world in an animated, collection, as opposed to looking at it as something that humans dominate. These two viewpoints, the Western and the indigenous, are very hard to kind of translate, and being able to ask the right questions as to what the problems are is, sort of at the center, it seemed, from our conversations. Correct me if I'm wrong, any of you folks. I kind of, consolidated that.
Looks like you're getting the thumbs up from your group members. Thank you so much for sharing that, John. Yeah. Other groups.
Well, we talked about, mostly I talked because one other person was verbal, but I didn't give them a chance. I come from a history of horrible white guilt because I was raised in South Dakota, and the Native people that I saw in my town were treated horribly, as if they were not human. And of course, then subsequently I learned about the schools, and got even more guilt. And it doesn't matter if I did it or not. Society did it to them, and I'm part of that, and I need to make reparations. That's in my heart, and that's why I was part of a group that started conversations with a Lakota family, and the best way to do that is to approach them in a heartfelt way of wanting to learn about their culture and have conversations about that, and to listen with curiosity and acceptance, and then ask them if you could be allies to some project or some problem that they have, and help in any way that you can. And if you have a relationship with them, they will welcome that. And it's not easy, because the first few times we met, I was afraid I was going to say something wrong every time I spoke. And not a problem, they know that we're clueless about a lot of stuff that went on. And I just ordered a book, The Indigenous History of the United States, and I hope that can give me more of a background besides what I saw in South Dakota. And so I'm just urging any of you who want to enter into a relationship with a group to not be afraid. Just, take the first step, talk to someone that can recommend maybe another person to talk to, and start a group.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your comments, Susan. Yes, so approaching these conversations with one having done your homework, right? This is our work as settlers. If you identify as a white settler, that is our work to do, right? It is not the job of Indigenous folks to educate us. That is our work, and we need to commit to it, and we need to do it. There is a plethora of resources. I can link to many of them, but you probably know how to find them as well. So doing your homework, doing your internal work. also approaching those conversations with humility. Extremely important, right? Curiosity, listening, humility, and staying really grounded in your UU faith values as well. And your communities and your congregations can be good sources of support and grounding for those conversations as well. Is there one more group to report, or did everybody share out?
Our group didn't report. I just took some notes. And I hope I represent everyone, because we were just doing a lot of bullet points. So a lot of statements made. But in looking at self-assessment and the importance of it, we also mentioned understanding the impact regarding assessing harm and what is our intention and all this, some of the things that you were alluding to. I also described what we're doing at the Northfield UU Fellowship and looking into all of our regional history, local history, but also a lot with Red Wing. They're doing so much that we even joined them for Indigenous Peoples Day, going through their museum, going through the mural, huge, beautiful mural that they just unveiled. So trying to look at now what we do next is important. And someone mentioned really thinking about how to spend our money and use our resources. Did I cover everything, group?
Thank you so much, Nita. That's actually a really nice bridge into our next kind of question and prompt, the sort of second phase of the action plan, which is doing a resource assessment for your congregation. And any of you that are sort of engaged on a regular basis in justice work are probably familiar with this concept of asset mapping or resource assessment. And so applying that to working in support of Indigenous communities is a really important first step. So before you can even dive in, right, you assess what resources your congregation might already have, the people within your congregation or your congregation as a whole. So for this second breakout, I'm going to invite you to consider the question, what resources can your congregation provide to support Indigenous peoples? And don't be afraid to get creative here, right? Think, kind of just broaden your mind around potential resources. Of course, there's financial resources, but what else? Think bigger and more broadly. So Leslie, if you could give us another 5 minutes in breakout to discuss this question, and that will be, and then we'll come back and share out again. Okay. Rolling right along. It's already 11.
Yep.
So I'm thinking we might skip the final. Well, maybe if we just, maybe we'll be okay. The land back video is longer, it's 10 minutes, but it is pretty important.
Let's see. I mean, I'm wondering if maybe the next collecting responses might be a little abbreviated.
Yeah.
Since we were already kind of getting into
right.
that already. And then we've got slides.
The first, yeah, I think that part can roll right along. It's just sort of examples of
Right.
questions to start to.
Especially if we're sharing the slides with them that has all those questions on them anyway.
Right.
Will I be sharing both slides? Or
One at a time.
One and then later in the presentation, the other one?
Yeah.
It sounds good. All right. And then we've talked about like research and action plans, so that should probably roll along.
Yeah.
Do we want to do the breakout rooms to talk about action plans, or
maybe we could just do it as a group? Would that be faster maybe?
Because then you'll have a better sense of when that's done.
Right.
No, and you can roll right along if you need to.
Okay, so the last one then, once you've done your research, create a concrete action.
Yeah, so I think if we start the video by 11:15,
yeah,
we'll still have time to kind of wrap things up.
Okay. So I have on this sheet right now 2 more breakout rooms. But maybe we should, maybe I
I mean, maybe the breakout rooms we've done already have kind of broken the ice for chatting. And the next 2 breakout rooms could just be like a quick all group discussion.
Okay. Let's do that, just because I think then we have more control over cutting it off.
Right. And actually maybe starting the video by 11:10, between 11:10 and 11:15, and then we won't feel rushed for ending.
Okay.
Because
So
I think the wrap up that you have is really important too.
Okay.
Do you want me to give them 60 seconds?
Yeah.
Done. Welcome back.
Hello.
Thanks. I didn't mean to leave. I was talking.
Oh no. Well, I think Leslie closed the rooms anyway.
Yeah, everyone else will be
here soon. Yeah.
Forced back in here in 10 seconds anyway.
Okay.
Here they come.
Hi, Sue. Sorry. I didn't mean to leave.
It's easy to do with all the things on the screen.
Yes.
Welcome back, everybody. So hopefully that was helpful, just again, not comprehensive, but just to get the wheels turning, thinking about the resources that your congregation has, both collectively and individually, right? Thinking about all the people that make up your congregation. Maybe you have an incredible writer who could, write an editorial on behalf of your congregation in support of an Indigenous cause. Maybe you have an artist that could create an amazing protest sign. So those are some of the ways I meant to sort of just think beyond simply financial. But I'd love to hear from you, just sort of quickly, what you came up with, what sorts of resources and ideas you came up with in your discussions.
Well, as you're speaking, hello. Can I go
Hi.
ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Jean.
In our group, we certainly could, do things like the plate on Sunday mornings, but having conversations is important with Native people as to what they need or want, were some of the things. But I just had this struggle in my head as you came back to the group is we, the Unitarian Society sponsored 3 Ukrainian families to come over. And we kind of set a budget, and then we went about fundraising because we're going to need money to support these 3 families. We raised $72,000 in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And we don't need all that money. For these 3 families do not need all this money. And we're going to do something with the money, and we haven't decided that. But I just am like, wait a minute. We could raise that much money in 2 weeks to help families. Why don't we take 3 Native families here in Minneapolis and raise some money and take them under our wing and care for them? I was like, wow, we have the power of the purse for sure. When you're talking about money resources, but we also have people. We had 40 people step up to help these 3 Ukrainian families. So we have people resources who have all sorts of skills that they've helped with, you know, teachers, lawyers, everybody. So anyway, it's doable. If our congregations want to do it, it's doable.
Thank you, Jean. Shelley.
Well, we had the usual finance and people. I talked about our endowment. I'm also with the First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis. Our foundation endowment uses social screens, so we're already, you know, screening out, or I should say, we're screening for social justice. And our congregation was involved for 7 years with the Dakota 38+2 reconciliation ride held every year in Mankato. So we, you know, had people. We also had a number of congregants who participated in various pipeline protests. But Lindsay had what I thought was really a fantastic idea, which is giving airtime. You know, inviting Native nations to come and talk to our congregations, paying them for their time, you know, not asking them to do it for free, but providing a platform for them to share a message to what is likely going to be a very receptive audience. So just, yeah, so the power of our platform as congregations.
Thank you. Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Shelley. Lindsay, you had a comment in the chat I just wanted to lift up. You wrote, I found it's really easy to support refugees and newcomers and much harder for people to support those whose suffering has been actually benefiting us for centuries. Feels too complicated. Thank you for lifting that up, Lindsay. Is there anything else you want to add to that comment?
Sorry. Yeah. Just that it's like, you have to, I mean, yeah, that it's just really complicated, that people are just a lot more resistant. It feels like, yeah, why shouldn't we be able to just raise all this money? But it isn't the same. And that's something to maybe even say outright when trying to gather support for, you know, for Indigenous, or I think the African American kind of problem, not problem, the racism problem in this country more generally. I think that those are 2 places that it's really hard, because I found that it was really easy to get support for a bunch of African refugees, and there was a lot of resentment because the African Americans who lived alongside them were not receiving that support. And it was pretty justified, but right, it's like a much stickier kind of situation. So
Yep. Thank you very much for lifting that up, Lindsay. Yeah. I want to point out also a comment from Anna. Is it Anna or Anna? Anna.
It's Anna, yeah.
Oh, Anna, I'm sorry. Yeah, Anna.
No worries.
There is something about financial resources that makes me uncomfortable, as in we shouldn't necessarily assume that Indigenous families are not financially stable. Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Anna?
I guess I just appreciate that you asked us to think beyond that too, because it made me think, well, like, there are likely things that are needed, but assuming that it is financial is a whole assumption in itself. Like there probably is something, but it could be something else entirely.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. Malia.
Yeah, I think one thing that this is bringing up for me is kind of how do we have build relationships of both depth and breadth in the Native community, recognizing that no one speaks for, you know, a whole culture or a whole nation, you know, and no one certainly can speak for what is actually an incredible diversity and breadth of cultures and nations, and also recognizing when it comes to the question of kind of reparations and how do we be in a long-term relationship that moves resources in a way that acknowledges the history of the land and of colonialism. We also, you know, I just think there's complexity in terms of reckoning too with, we're also talking about sovereign nations.
Yeah.
Alongside, you know, groups that are sort of culturally embedded in the Native community, and individuals, and how do we be respectful of those different levels and those different kinds of relationships too. So, and that's just to say, like, there are a lot of possibilities, and I think one of the first steps for all of us is sort of recognizing that complexity too, in terms of governance and different kinds of organizations, and that also respects Native sovereignty in a culture and place where we still really don't understand and respect it very well, you know, just broadly.
Oh, yeah. Yes, thank you. Very important points. And I appreciate you bringing those points into this space. And the financial support of the tribes is one way that we can support Indigenous sovereignty, right? So that they can direct those resources to where they think they need to go, as opposed to where, you know, we think they should go. So that is one place where financial resources directly to tribal governance is really a good way to bolster Indigenous sovereignty. I just want to, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. I know we said we would wrap at 11:30. I want to share a video that addresses this land back movement, because I think there's a lot of questions around it, and I think it's an important, it's important that we dip into that topic, and explore it a little bit and what it might mean for our congregations. So sorry to pivot on you, Leslie, but would you be able to play the "Whose Land Are You On" video?
I'm here today as a guest on land that was stolen from the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho nations. Land that many other tribal nations thought of as home before those relationships were written over by settler colonialism. So land acknowledgements like this have become pretty commonplace at the beginning of events, at universities, sometimes in our email signatures. But I've always found them to be kind of confusing. Like, once you admit something is stolen, aren't you supposed to give it back? So if there's anyone listening who has a couple hundred spare acres that you're feeling guilty about, just contact your local tribal government. We would be happy to relieve you of that burden. That's probably not you, right? Maybe you've heard of this movement to return land to Indigenous people, but you're thinking, I can barely afford rent. What is it I'm supposed to be giving back? That's what I want to clarify today. Because not only is getting land back in Indigenous hands in your best interests, and the best interests of the land itself, there's ways anyone can help make it happen. I'm a descendant of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, which is part of the Anishinaabe Nation of the Great Lakes region. Home, for me, is also the Pacific Northwest. I grew up on Kalapuya and Molalla territory, and now I'm a professor of Indigenous Studies at CSU. My ancestors worked very hard to navigate a complex and changing world that was ravaged by settler colonialism. My grandma and both of her parents survived the trauma and abuse of the Indian boarding school system. The generation before them fought to keep our tribe from being terminated by the federal government. Going even further back, my 6 times great-grandfather's signature is on the 1863 Treaty of Old Crossing, which forced the Anishinaabe to give up 11 million acres of what's now Minnesota in exchange for a little over $400,000 and a 640-acre reservation. That works out to about 5 cents an acre, which has to be one of the worst land deals in US history. Or maybe the best, depending on who you ask. This sort of thing happened all over the US and Canada. And the problem isn't just that settlers showed up and took the land, it's how they've treated it ever since. That land we lost in Minnesota, the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline goes right through the middle of it. That freaking pipeline is responsible for the largest inland oil spill ever recorded in the US. And now, they're trying to expand it. Whether we're talking pipelines or some other industry, the colonial mindset has been about extracting resources, mostly with the goal of making the rich richer. But that's why Land Back is not about Indigenous people trying to run a real estate scam. We're doing this because the land itself is in crisis. Every Indigenous culture is unique, but our shared philosophy is that we come from the land and the land is what sustains us. And therefore, we have a responsibility to care for it. Land Back is about reasserting Indigenous relationships.
If you have an hour this week, you can learn 100 songs on the piano by learning just 4 chords. These.
With the land. Relationships that are based on tens of thousands of years of hands-on experience taking care of our homelands. If you've ever tried your hand at farming or gardening, you know that land management takes more than just showing up with good intentions. Globally, Indigenous people are really good at managing for biodiversity and resilient ecosystems. That's because we've had generation upon generation to test out what works and what doesn't. There's tons of evidence and examples to back this up. One recent study showed that Indigenous people make up just 5% of the global population, but we're managing nearly half the areas on Earth that are protected for conservation or still support intact ecosystems. In the United States, tribal nations have reintroduced endangered species, even when the government said it wouldn't work. So in the Northwest, where I grew up, most of the big rivers have been dammed, which makes it super hard for salmon to survive, and many runs have gone extinct. So back in the 90s, the Nimipu people told the state of Idaho, hey, we'd like to bring coho salmon back to the Snake River. The state fish and wildlife guys were like, I don't think so. But the tribe did it anyway. They got eggs that one of the hatcheries was gonna throw away, incubated them, and basically snuck the fish back into the river. And now they're doing so well that the state has reopened the sport fishery, and the tribe is reintroducing coho to a bunch of other rivers. Same thing with buffalo. Back in the 1800s, when the railroads were going in and Native people were literally being kicked off the land at gunpoint, buffalo were nearly exterminated because they thought that would make it easier to subdue the tribes who depended on them. So get this, most of the buffalo that you see today in zoos or wildlife reserves are actually descended from conservation herds that Native people protected back then. And now, the Blackfeet Nation is bringing free-ranging buffalo back to their homeland in Montana. We're also pretty good at cleaning up the ecological messes caused by colonialism. The town of Eureka, California was like, okay, we're ready to give some land back. We know it's culturally a really important place to you. Oh, and by the way, it's a Superfund site, so it's hella polluted. Good luck with that. And the Wyatt tribe said, great, we'll take it. And now they're in the process of successfully remediating the site. They've removed tons of trash and contaminated soil. They're working on erosion control and wildlife habitat and making it a place where they can hold ceremonies again. The land is better off in Indigenous hands because we treat the land like it's a relative. Even our youth know how this works. So I run a summer camp for Native kids where we talk about Indigenous science and how we relate to the land. So last summer, after the camp wraps up, Henry's mom calls me. He's one of the campers, he's 6. And she says he's had a falling out with his best friend. They were playing outside and the friend, who's not Native, was squishing grasshoppers for fun. Henry tried to stop him, and the friend said, "They're just bugs. It doesn't matter." But Henry told him, "They're not just bugs. They're our relatives, and you can't kill them." So that was the summer I had to learn how to keep grasshoppers from eating my garden with garlic spray, because every time I went to use pesticides or something that would kill them, I thought of Henry and what kind of future we might have if we actually lived like that. Land Back is about radically rethinking how we relate to the land and other living beings. So look up whose land you're on. Some tribes, like the Ohlone and Duwamish, have a way for you to pay a voluntary land tax on their website as a way to recognize that you're a guest on their homeland. Way easier than dealing with the IRS. Or maybe you do own land, but you need to live there for now. You can set up a bequest in your will so that your estate goes back to the tribe. I'm not saying that any of this is easy. Unsettling is hard work, especially in places where Indigenous people were removed or erased. That absence tends to be papered over with the myth that colonialism worked, Native people disappeared, so there's nothing to worry about. But when I look at my own family's history, the government that took our land and outlawed our ceremonies, the boarding schools that took our language, the epidemic of sexual violence that has touched nearly every Native woman in my family. All of these concerted efforts to end the story of us as Anishinaabe people. And yet, despite all that, we're still here. Our survival as Indigenous people is a miracle. And the point of miracles is that they inspire action. I think if we're honest as human beings, we know that this path we're on is both morally untenable and ecologically unsustainable. Land Back is a call to action. To get real that the current system is only really working for an increasingly smaller group of folks. But when the people who are benefiting from this legacy of stolen land step forward, real change can happen. This isn't just an opportunity to right a past injustice. It's the only way to heal the land itself. And that means a better future for everyone. Thank you.
Okay. So this Land Back movement is gaining traction in Minnesota. Very recently, you may have read in the news, the Minnesota Historical Society returned, I think it was 120 acres of land back to the Lower Sioux Indian community, land that that community has just fought for many, many years to transfer back to them. So Leslie posted the link in the video to that that TED Talk. I'll include it in the follow-up email as well. I know we just have a few minutes to go here, and I'm really thinking that a part 2 might be a good idea. Because there's so much here, and this is the tip of the iceberg, just the beginning of our conversations. But any thoughts or reactions from the video that you'd like to share with the group?
I'd like to just share that the idea of having a follow-up, I think, makes a lot of sense, because there's some other people from my congregation who I think ought to, see and hear this. And it'd be nice if we could. Has this all been recorded? Is it possible to have this as a resource that we could, so you didn't have to repeat everything for another meeting? Just the thought.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is being recorded, and I will include the uploaded link to the recording for you to share. And I'll go ahead and have a book a follow-up, and anyone that's free can join us to continue this conversation. Malia.
I just want to quickly share a resource that has some interesting things related to Land Back, which is Anya Steinberg had done a little podcast several years ago related to Camp Unistar, where she talked to a lot of Native folks, right? And within the Leech Lake tribe, which is Camp Unistar is on the Leech Lake reservation land. And I think that it also gives some wonderful food for thought in terms of the various ways land back can happen. Because for instance, you know, when she talked to folks there, you know, do you want this piece of land back? Should we be giving this piece of land that Camp Unistar is on back? The answer was like, well, actually that is a really random piece of land for us, surrounded by federal land. It's not useful to us. Like, no, don't give us that land. What are we supposed to do with it? Versus where we can be collectively, for instance, advocating for, as you said, the state of Minnesota to give back land, where we can, that, you know, it may be chunks of land that are actually much more usable for instance, a tribe. So I think that, anyway, there's like so much more wonderful stuff to talk about. I appreciate the idea of a follow-up. I'm just going to drop the link to that podcast, and it's a great one.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually, when I was staying at Camp Unistar, they recommended that we listen to it. And as I was in my spidery bunk, I listened to the whole thing while I was there, and I agree. It's really worth a listen, and it also explores sort of the history of UU relationships with this land back movement. Thank you, Malia. I know it really was spidery, Jill. But I survived. It was major for me. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up here?
Judy has her hand up.
What's that?
Judy has her hand up.
Oh, Judy, I'm sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, I just wanted to I put a link to a website that it talks about native rights, nature rights, and the water protectors in Minnesota actually did try to sue to support nature as having legal rights. Well, it was dismissed, of course, because we don't have legal rights for nature. But I just thought I would lift up the effort by Indigenous people to try to get legal rights for nature. And it also illustrates their very different attitudes toward nature, which was referenced in the last video.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Judy. And it is a really important reminder that, you know, this land back movement, yes, if you have access to land, or you can leave it in your will, or encourage the institutions you're a part of to donate land, that's amazing. If you don't have access to that, you know, it's about a mind shift, and it's about our relationship, getting in right relationship with the land. That's step one. Seeing the land as a relative, that grasshopper anecdote, and for you and your congregation to really explore what it looks like to live into that idea of getting in right relationship with the land, and seeing it as a relative. Obviously a very anti-colonial mentality, right? And so shifting that thought away from that culture of extraction that we're a part of, and seeing the land as a resource that we can take from, but getting in right relationship and seeing that as a reciprocal relationship with a family member.
And that also means organic gardening.
Yay for that. Yes. I know we've got a lot of UU gardeners, so keep up the gardening. The last thing I just wanted to resource, just to throw out here, Minnesota Honor Tax, mnhonortax.org, has been set up as a way for folks in Minnesota to voluntarily support the tribes. And there's even sort of a breakdown on like what your income is and what a reasonable donation would be by way of reparations. And these funds go directly to the tribes. So it's a good way to help support tribal sovereignty as well.
And I did put a link to that in the chat.
You did. Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Judy.
Yes.
So again, the follow-up email will contain all the links and guides and information you should need. And I'll throw out a follow-up just so that we can touch base, help hold each other accountable, and continue the conversation for anyone who's interested in diving a little bit more deeply. So Leslie, would you do the honors of extinguishing for us?
So you can extinguish the chalice either physically in your space or in your hearts as our time comes to a close. The chalice is now extinguished, but its light lives on in the minds and hearts and souls of each one of you. Carry that flame with you as you leave this place and share it with those you know, with those you love, and most especially with those you have yet to meet. So we want to thank you for being here. You can journey well and go in peace, and look for that follow-up email from Katie tomorrow with links to the resources and the videos that are provided here.
Thank you for being here, everyone. Be well.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy your day.